Not all meaningful resistance ends up on the front pages of history. There's acts of resistance in the earliest histories of Arizona and the American Southwest when local natives, specifically the Sobaipuri O'odham, stood in opposition against intrusiveness, trespass, injustice, against lawlessness. These acts were incredibly consequential, but they were so small, so seemingly minor in nature, that they've been missed by historians until now. Here's one example. The Coronado expedition occurred between 1539 and 1542, and there's 4 stages to the expedition that are relevant to this topic. And it was during the 3rd stage, when Coronado actually came through, that we see a particularly informative act. This was in June of 1540. Esteban had already been killed at Cibola in May of 1539. Diaz had already stayed unexpectedly for 2 months on the San Pedro among the Sobaipuri at Chichilticalli in late 1539. The Sobaipuri had attacked Diaz's encampment in early 1540, and the Spaniards had fled south. Nevertheless, 4 months after the battle, Coronado and his men came through the area. When Jaramillo and Coronado came through, Jaramillo wrote, "Some Indians came out to see the general with a gift of little value, some roasted maguey stalks and pitahayas, or saguaro fruit." It seems that Jaramillo and Coronado were disappointed in the nature of the gifts they were given. And part of the reason for this is about a year before, Fray Marcos had been given much higher quality gifts. Fray Marcos de Niza wrote, "They brought me much game deer, rabbits and quail and corn and pinole, all in great abundance. They offered me many turquoises, hides, very lovely gourd bowls, and other things." So there was an expectation for quality food in abundance. Fray Marcos had also said, "I went through that valley for 5 days, which is so populated by splendid people and which is so supplied with food that it's enough to feed more than 300 horses. Everything was irrigated, and it's like an orchard or evergreen garden." But things had already changed, and there were consequences. The archaeological record conveys that a battle occurred in 1540 between the Sobaipuri O'odham and Diaz, probably because he demanded and took too much corn and other resources. And this had consequences a few months later when Coronado came through. The expedition had to move on, despite the fact that the horses were tired. In fact, Coronado tells us, "We only stayed 2 days at Chichilticalli on the San Pedro, and we needed to stay longer because the horses were exhausted. They were tired. They needed more rest, but we were low on food." So Coronado and Jaramillo had expected corn. This corn was required for their own consumption, but also with its high energy content, corn was needed for their ailing horses in their final push towards Cibola. Instead, they were given food that had little worth to them because cacti didn't measure up to their expectations. And in fact, it had consequences for the expedition. Several Indian allies died, and a Spaniard and 2 Moors ate poisonous plants and died. Also, a number of horses died of exhaustion during this final leg of the trip. And equally importantly, once they got to Zuni or Cibola, they precipitated an immediate attack because they were so hungry, they needed food, they were starving. So it had consequences for Zuni as well. This small act of resistance by the Sobaipuri O'odham cascaded with the element of time. It caused a chain reaction of consequences for the remainder of the expedition, and probably this was unknown to the Sobaipuri O'odham themselves. And we see this in the earliest parts of the documentary record. The small act of resistance.